I'm standing alongside what was once the recreation hall at number 33 Elementary Flying Training School at Caron, Saskatchewan, Canada. After the Second World War, the Airbase was sold to Briarcrest Bible Institute and later became Caronport. I grew up among these buildings. They were my playground. My father supervised their care. Over the last decade, I've searched long and hard to understand what happened here during the war. Last year, Neil Turner, whose father Tommy had learned to fly here, asked me to advise his group who were undertaking a simulation of the Caron Air Base. This is our place. Our fathers' biographies are attached to this patch of Canadian prairie. Come with us as we roll back the clock 80 years. Here's the story, more or less as it happened. This is number 33 Elementary Flying Training School near Caron, Saskatchewan. It was part of the most successful air training program in history, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Number 33, along with dozens of other training schools, helped provide 130,000 aircrew to the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. This is her story. The simulation, based on Joel Fromm's research and official documents, is accurate to within a few feet. Runways, buildings, and artifacts are positioned exactly where they were in October 1943. Between January 1942 and January 1944, 1,837 student pilots were trained at number 33. They followed a 60-hour syllabus to become competent in taxiing, basic flying skills, takeoffs and landings, instruments, basic aerobatics, and night flying. Typically, courses lasted 8 weeks. Standards were rigorous. Those who washed out were often redeployed in other roles such as navigator, gunner, bomb aimer, radio operator, or flight engineer. In the early days, instructors were drawn from the ranks of experienced Canadian pilots. Many longed to fly combat missions, but, to their great frustration, they were held back to train others. It is they who are the unsung heroes of the air training plan. Leading aircraftman second class, Tommy Turner takes to the air. Tommy had recently arrived in Caron from Gourock, Scotland, following a journey on a packed Queen Mary across the U-boat infested North Atlantic. Fairchild PT-26 was a standard elementary trainer in 1943. Our model is the PT-19, which lacks the PT-26's canopy cover. There were no electronics on board, no radios, navigation beams, or autopilots. Just a Mark I eyeball, map, and compass. Jig's arrow, here in the foreground, served as a rudimentary wind direction indicator. Number 33 was busy. Over the course of October 1943, some 8,700 flying hours were logged by 58 serviceable aircraft, each of which averaged 6 flights a day. The Canadian prairies, with their wide open skies and proximity to the U.S. aircraft industry, provided a perfect arena for air training. Most student pilots at Caron had left an England beset by air raids, blackouts, and food rationing. Canada's brilliant skies, abundant food, and hospitality were greatly appreciated. A new cohort of student pilots, typically a group of 60, arrived every 2 weeks. In the fall of 1943, Caron hosted approximately 240 students at any given time. The amazing success of number 33 and her fellow training centers largely came down to the Canadian people who designed, built, and administered them. All Air Force buildings were built from pre-cut lumber and standard designs that could be rapidly assembled. In the time it took to build this simulation, Caron's airfield had been completed, her buildings erected, and flying operations commenced. Our student, Tommy Turner, comes in over the Airmen's Mess Hall. And departs eastward over the parade ground and number 1 hangar. Across the program, discipline was tight, but daring deeds were sometimes overlooked to foster skills required in combat. Let's take a tour of the base. There is heavy rain and a strong breeze today, which means no flying, a common occurrence at Caron. We are at the front gate. This image is one of many Second World War era photos taken at Caron. On our immediate right is the fire hall. To the left is the headquarters and ground instruction school. Here are some of the headquarters staff. More than 12,000 civilians served with them in the air training program. We'll stop in the motor transport section for a quick fuel stop. We are now at the maintenance facilities. Course group photos were typically taken in front of facilities like this. Course number 68 had this photo taken in November 1942. In this photo from May 1942, station headquarters staff, including Commanding Officer Werger Slade and Patty the dog, are pictured. Just to the north is the medical center. Its team poses for a photograph. The Recreation Hall, to the right, also served as a cinema, lecture hall, and chapel. Student pilots could meet and mingle with local girls at regular dances and even enjoy a beer or two. Note the roof ladder, which was used for maintenance and firefighting. A change of weather is in the offing. Snow is setting in. Caron received about 25 inches of snow and 10 inches of rain each year. Temperatures ranged from minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit to over 100 degrees. There was little to block the prevailing northwest wind. Breaking through the flurries, the sun gleams off the icy tarmac. It wasn't just the weather. The isolation and the vast flat prairie came as a shock to many English trainees, most of whom had never ventured overseas before. The drill hall provided a large, sheltered space for drill practice, sports, and general assembly. It is one of the few remaining structures still in active service. It is now utilized by Briarcrest College and Seminary as a gymnasium. The original flagpole remains in service as well. These two H blocks housed the lower ranks, while the sergeants and officers were billeted further away from the noisy runways. Many, if not most, of these young men, with an average age of 21, would not survive the war. This image from Caron was taken by some of its first aircrew. Our model positions them in their place in the original photograph. This bump out on the east side of hangar number 1 housed the Flight Operations Office. A group of students waits for the wind to drop so that they can get airborne. Only poor visibility, extreme cold, or strong winds could pause flight operations. The Kapok suits were designed for warmth, at least in theory. Student pilots familiarized themselves with small arms, service rifles, and Browning machine guns at the 25-yard range. These targets were used at Caron. They were salvaged after the base had been decommissioned. The Link Trainer building housed 4 flight simulators designed to test and enhance the student pilots' aerial skills. Let's take a quick look into the hangar before we take to the skies again before the sun sets. Like most air training buildings, the hangars were a prefab design which could be quickly erected. Some are still in use today, 80 years later. The interior had ample room for overnight parking and general repairs conducted by the ground crew. The balcony shown here takes some poetic license, one of the very few details that had to be imagined in this model of number 33. Basic services such as swapping a wing, engine, or wheels could be performed at Caron. This Ranger L440C engine is ready to be swapped into a Cornell. Quickly, let's go outside. Something is happening. 3 Cornells are conducting a fly-past. Formation flying of this sort was not permitted at elementary schools. This skill was typically learned at service flying training schools. Many student fatalities were occasioned by exceeding what was permitted. Mock dog fights and low-flying accidents killed more than a few student pilots. These chaps are likely instructors here to overfly a parade. pausing the hangar before departure. Night falls at Caron. The beacon flashes to bring the airborne home. To indicate the nighttime wind direction, the jig's arrow is now illuminated. Note the blue lights marking the taxiway. Red beacons indicate each end of the hard surface runways. This pilot lines up his aircraft's nose with the beacon at the far end of the runway. He opens up the throttle and is on his way. Hopefully, he has not mistaken his target for the red collision beacon of another aircraft. Gooseneck flares were used to mark the designated landing path. They had to be constantly refilled with kerosene and repositioned as the wind direction changed. It's the next day. More visitors are inbound. How many of these aircraft do you recognize? The air training program had one overriding purpose: to provide large quantities of skilled aircrew to frontline squadrons. These young men replaced the crippling losses in the RAF's fighter and bomber command. As the Allies gained air superiority and whose losses diminished, the air training plan began winding down. Identified the aircraft. They include a Tiger Moth, a Cornell, and an RCAF Harvard, all stalwarts of the air training plan. we leave Tommy Turner to complete his elementary training. Tommy would graduate from Caron on 12 December 1943. He then went to number 41 SFTS in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, where he flew Harvards and Ansons and earned his coveted wings. He later returned to England to join 582 Pathfinder Squadron as a Lancaster sergeant pilot. He survived the war.